Showtime.
Manning Kimmel. Welcome to the Schiller and Hamilton podcast.
This is such an aberration from what I normally do.
Well, how the tables have turned.
They have. Remember, payback can be,
right.
You know what?
That's right, because how many times have I been in the hot seat?
Yeah, many times.
We had mentioned we're meeting over at Pathways, which we'll talk about eventually, but you mentioned this was maybe the second time you've actually ever been interviewed.
I can't even remember when the first one was. Mm-hmm. So this is a different experience for me because I'm usually the one throwing out the questions, waiting for the answers. And now I'm wondering what the heck you're going to ask me.
Well, I have to tell you, for me, it's been like really exciting. I texted Trent like a week ago. I said, you'll never guess. Manning Kimmel has agreed to come in and actually be interviewed. So this is one that I've been looking forward to. And we've talked about, for months and, kind of joking around trying to arrange it. So
maybe years.
I'm thrilled that I get the chance just to sit down and talk to you. And I don't even know, honestly, where to begin. There's so many things that I want to talk and ask you about. I don't know how much time you have. This might have to be.
You're a good lawyer. You'll figure it out.
This may have to be part one of several. So I know what I want to talk about first of all, though. And when I was trying to think about this, I thought, well, what better place to start than the beginning?
All right.
So, but when you think about the beginning, when you read it, well, when you think about like a biography, it rarely starts with, the person was born on this date. A lot of times they might start with a generation or two before and talk about, where this person came from.
Oh my.
And with you, that seems even more important to discuss and maybe right out of the gate, because I wanted to ask you about Admiral Kimmel.
Oh my.
Your grandfather. And we haven't talked at all about what we're going to talk about.
We have only a couple of hours for this.
Yeah. But we haven't talked at all about what we're going to talk about. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, right. But this is a fascinating story that you've told me about several times. And I know it's very personal to you, but it's also a very important story to talk about, I feel like, publicly, and because it's part of history.
Yeah.
So I want to, you've told the story several times, I know, but tell us about your grandfather, Admiral Kimmel.
Admiral Husband Kimmel. Mm-hmm. Interesting name. Husband, that's his first name, was Husband E. Kimmel. He was Commander-in-Chief of the United States Navy, the whole entire fleet, on December 7th, 1941. And for anybody who knows anything about history, that's when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So our family, for now over 80 years, has been trying to get the truth out about what actually happened at Pearl Harbor. History has already recorded the facts, and the facts are now very clear. Sometimes it takes a long time for the real truth to unearth itself. But let me tell you what happened. Obviously, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and if you've seen any of the movies, Tora, 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 or the movie Pearl Harbor with Ben Affleck, you saw just human carnage like you wouldn't believe. I mean, they lost 2,400 sailors there. Lord knows how many civilians. Ships were sunk in the harbor. Watching those video clips, it was just amazing how horrific that day was. The Japanese orchestrated a masterful sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, and we know what happened. Mm-hmm. Right after the attack, the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said, I need to send somebody out there to kind of quantify exactly what happened. And he asked one of his justices on the Supreme Court, Justice Owen Roberts, to head up a commission. And they went out to Pearl Harbor, I'll say several weeks after the attack. Can you imagine what they saw? Blood and bodies, devastation, destruction everywhere. They didn't know how this could have happened. They had no information. They came back and concluded that the commanding officers, Admiral Husband Kimmel and General Walter Short, who was the Army commander, were, quote, derelict in their duty. That is a stigma you don't want to hang on anybody's neck, particularly somebody in the military. I can remember saying to my dad at a young age, this is the wrong question to ask. I said, Dad, why is this such a big deal? He looked at me with fire in his eyes, and he also was an attorney. And he said, to a military man, honor is above life itself. And what they did to your grandfather was virtually destroy him. And my grandfather, for several years after the attack, was convinced that he had screwed up somewhere. Now keep in mind, he had an unblemished record. He was selected by FDR to be the commander-in-chief of the U.S. fleet after Admiral Richardson had been fired by Roosevelt. And the reason he was fired is because he would not agree with Roosevelt's idea of moving the fleet from California, from San Diego, out to Pearl Harbor. And the reason that Admiral Richardson was so vehemently opposed to that was Pearl Harbor's an island out in the middle of the Pacific, and it's wide open to any kind of attack. There's just nothing out there to defend it. Well, Richardson got fired. Kimmel was put in place. Kimmel had done a masterful job on preparing the fleet as best he could with what he had to work with. Keep in mind that there was a war over there in that place called Europe that was going on. A lot of the armaments that we had were being given to our European allies, the British particularly, because we did not want to get into a war, World War II, after we were still reeling from World War I. And the American public was as divided about that as we were during the Vietnam War back in the 60s and 70s. Well, when the attack on Pearl Harbor came, we immediately became one nation, and we immediately went into the war effort. But we didn't have enough of anything prior to that attack to really properly defend Pearl Harbor. It's documented time and time again about the requests for air power, the requests for maintenance, requests for torpedo nets. I mean, the list goes on and on. My grandfather, on several occasions, had made that absolutely terrible trip from Pearl Harbor to Washington, D.C., to stand in front of his superiors, Admiral Stark, Harold Stark, and say, I need this, I need this, I need this. And he said, don't worry about that. We don't have it right now, but we're watching your six. We've got you covered. If anything happens there, you're going to know about it. If we pick up on any intelligence, we're going to let you know about this. Now, Stark and my grandfather were pretty good buddies. They were quasi-classmates at Annapolis. And so that relationship was a strong relationship. And you can imagine if you've got a good friend and you tell that friend, I'm going to do this for you, it's going to get done. Well, as it turns out, that's not what happened. We, meaning the military establishment, had broken the Japanese code. We had done that with these machines that had been developed called the purple machines. We were actually decoding everything the Japanese were saying to each other for quite a period of time prior to the attack of Pearl Harbor. This information was shared with various departments within Washington, D.C., and never, hard as it is to believe, never given to the Pearl Harbor commanders. They had information, probably the most famous one was the bomb plot message between Tokyo and its spies in Japan, at Pearl Harbor. And this was a directive to tell us what is in that harbor. We want you to grid the harbor. Tell us what kinds of ships are where, what kind of armament they have, what is their size, do they have any, these types of weapons and what have you. I mean, don't you think that would be valuable information to pass on to the Pearl Harbor commanders? For God's sake. Never happened.
Any speculation as to why? I mean, I know there's conspiracy theories.
We're going to get into that. And you're right. The conspiracy theory was such that FDR knew we had to get into the war, but the American public was divided. And so he let the attack happen because he knew the American public would come together. That is a theory and only a theory. There is no evidence of that.
Right. And what a thing to sacrifice, the entire Pacific fleet.
Right.
Yeah.
His beloved Navy. I mean, he loved the Navy.
Yeah.
Now, we do know, history has shown.
He was naval secretary at one point?
That's exactly. Not the secretary. He was like the undersecretary.
That's right.
And that's where he and my grandfather kind of met each other. And so when the time came to replace Richardson, he was going down this list of people. Kimmel, I remember that guy, yeah. And so my grandfather was promoted over a dozen or more senior officers for that job. All right. So the conspiracy theory was not what was going on. What we have been able to show after all these years is bureaucratic bungling at its greatest magnitude.
Pure incompetence.
The left hand would not communicate with the right hand. Same kind of problems we have right now. But back in those days, and it's important for people to understand, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have 24-hour news cycles. They didn't have satellites. They didn't have radar. They didn't have any of this stuff. Radar was a brand new technology that was just evolving. They had a very small radar installation that had just been delivered, just been set up, and they really didn't know how to operate it or what they were seeing. So, in fact, the radar responsibility was that for the Army, and the Army actually spotted this massive fleet of planes coming in, which were the Japanese, and thought it was a bunch of American planes being delivered to Pearl Harbor, so they just shut it down and didn't pay much attention to it. Not that it would have made a whole lot of difference.
So when you say that we had intelligence, we had code breaking, and that we were listening to them, who's the they? What was the agency that was actually involved with that intelligence gathering and would have been in charge of disseminating that intelligence?
I don't know what the actual name of it was, but...
Because this was pre-CIA,
NSA,
good Lord,
yes.
All these
things. Yeah. way before that.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that back in those days, the intelligence was basically passed from one person to another. Mm-hmm. If you picked up on something, I would tell you, you would tell them, and the message would eventually get down there. That's not what happened. We kept telling the wrong people, even though we had told the Pearl Harbor commanders that they were the ones that would be getting this information if and when they had disseminated it. But they didn't. Mm-hmm. It's just unbelievable what was going on. All right, so the attack took place. And we told you about the Owen Roberts group. They came back with a dereliction of duty. To make a very long story short, there were probably 7 or other such commissions that were held by various entities in the government. Now, you as an attorney know what this thing called due process means, right? You've got these things called constitutional rights, where you're allowed to confront those who say bad things about you. You're allowed to introduce evidence. You're allowed to plead your case. In every one of those Star Chamber proceedings, those are my words, not yours, he was not allowed that. And some of them he was not even allowed to attend. Can you imagine? In the American system of justice, that's how things worked back then? That's exactly how they worked. Until 1944. When the Naval Board of Inquiry was called together to take a look, the best of the best in the Navy, we're going to take a look at all of the facts as to what happened. And just prior to that, my grandfather, Admiral Kimmel, and you'll love this, Joel, he had a young naval officer who was an attorney by the name of Ed Hanafy. And Ed Hanafy stayed with him for 50 years after the attack on Pearl Harbor, helping him out with this, helping him out with that. Never once sent my grandfather a bill for services. Did it all pro bono because he believed in the Admiral and what he was doing. Anyway, they had all of a sudden become aware. My grandfather, here's a whole nother story. When he got out of the Navy and he retired, he was, as my dad used to say, was tricked into retirement. He had to do something to put food on the table.
How old would he have been at this point?
I would say probably in his early 50s,
okay.
So early to mid 50s. So he was an engineer by trade, and he had a lot of connections in engineering. And this was, of course, post-World War II, just about over with. And so there was a lot of need for engineers. And he was hired by one of his friends and given a job to, oversee the reinstallation or the rebuilding of certain military facilities that had gotten blown up during the war. And so they were doing that work, and of course there are government forms you have to fill out and send in to get reimbursement. And somebody in Washington noticed that the project manager of this project was a guy by the name of Husband Kimmel, Admiral Husband Kimmel. The Navy Department calls the engineering firm and says, you either take Kimmel off this job or we're going to pull this contract.
Unbelievable.
And my grandfather's friend said, the hell with that, you're not going to do that. Well, my grandfather very quickly said, no, I'm not going to put you in the middle of this. I'm out. The Navy tried to destroy my grandfather after all this was going on. Anytime he tried to make a move, they tried to destroy him. So he basically went to work for himself, working the stock market and putting food on the table, and he was able to do that.
Why? Why do you think they went to such great lengths? I mean, after you call him derelict in his duty, you basically throw him under not just any bus, but the bus.
Well, because probably he had the goods on him. Because while he was in that office as an engineer, he had one of his underlings come to him from the Navy who just couldn't understand why Kimmel didn't know about this message and about this message and about this message. And when he came, Lawrence Safford, when he came to my grandfather and told him this, my grandfather said, "What are you talking about? I never saw any of this stuff. I was never told any of this stuff." And my father said, at that moment, your grandfather went from a broken man to a raging tiger. And he started the quest to try to get the truth out on the books. And because of his political skills and those of others like Ed Hannafy, they were able to get this Naval Board of Inquiry called. This was the best of the best in the Navy, taking a look at every bit of minutia as to what happened prior and after that attack to see if there was any basis for this dereliction of duty charge. And guess what? They came back and said there's absolutely no basis for a dereliction of duty. He did everything he could with what he had to work with. So you would think that would be the end of it, right? No. The story gets even better. His superiors take that report. They don't like what it says, and so they bury it. And it never sees the light of day. For years afterwards, never saw the light of day. And so the scapegoating of Admiral Husband Kimmel continued by the government trying to ruin him and keep the stigma on him rather than it going to somewhere else. Now, where is that somewhere else? Well, all these years later, as I say, here we are 80 years later, for the last 20 years, it's been very clear. All the evidence is there. His superiors in Washington, D.C. had this information, and they just didn't do anything with it because they were stupid. Mm-hmm. They were just stupid. They thought this guy was talking to Kimmel, and this guy thought, I'm talking to, and nobody was talking to anybody. It's unbelievable. Even when they got the 14th part of the message showing for sure that attack was coming, they were so inept that they couldn't pick the telephone up and say, "Kimmel, watch your six because the Japanese are coming." They couldn't do it. And the film actually, Pearl Harbor with Ben Affleck, shows it so clearly. They sent a telegram, not by emergency systems, but just a regular old telegram that arrives an hour and a half after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
So that actually happened?
That actually happened. And I'll tell you what else actually happened. My grandfather, when he was trying to do what he could in his command headquarters, and he's overlooking Pearl Harbor and his beloved Navy being torn apart by these Japanese fighters, and a bullet came right through that glass. He had, how they used to carry their glasses cases, right here in the pocket. That thing hit his glass case and ricocheted off. And my grandfather was quoted as saying, "It would have been better had it killed me."
Wow.
Yeah. So that's just getting you up to the current events.
Right.
You had enough yet?
So that's been 80 years. I know this has been an ongoing quest.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what have we been doing in recent history? Mm-hmm. So in recent history, when all these facts became very clear, ever since I moved to South Carolina, we became very good friends with a guy by the name of, raise your hand, if you've heard of a fellow by the name of Strom Thurmond. Mm-hmm. Strom Thurmond, John Spratt, many others, Fritz Hollings, the rest of them in South Carolina were very helpful when they were in office during my early years here in South Carolina in helping us advance this cause. One day, because we had as a great paper chase. I mean, we had more papers going back and forth. I have stacks of letters, Joel.
Are you putting all this together throughout this time? Are you the one chasing down the documents and the
No. That's my dad.
Gotcha.
My dad was an attorney.
Yeah, he had done a lot of legwork.
This was his wheelhouse.
Gotcha.
He had a room in his house. He was a corporate attorney, and when he retired in his early 60s, we set up a room for him in his house in Wilmington, Delaware. We called the War Room, and we set it up with some new stuff called computers and fax machine because it was all brand new at that time. And he sat up there, I'm telling you, 40 to 50 hours a week and just worked it. And he basically gave me my orders, do this. And yes, sir, I'll do that. So when we got the South Carolina delegation involved, things really started to happen. One day, Strom Thurmond's office said, "Can you come on down here and see us?" We said, "Sure, we're glad to come down here." So my dad came down from Delaware, I came in from South Carolina, and we met at Strom Thurmond's office. And this is kind of a funny story. We were told when we went in there that sometimes the senator would take a nap, and you might think he wasn't paying any attention to you, but just go in there and keep on talking. Okay, we're going to do that. So we go into this office, and it's a magnificent office. And he had photographs, black and white framed pictures from ceiling to floor of all the people across the world he had met. It was incredible. Never seen anything like it. And he had all his staff members there, and there was a senator at the desk, and he was just kind of like this the whole time. And his staff said, we don't have a case file down here that's as big as this Kimmel thing. Is there anything else we can do? And I remember distinctly, I said, yeah, here's what you can help us do. We have got to stop the great paper chase. We need to confront these people eyeball to eyeball and see if we can't get this thing off dead center. And with that, Strom Thurmond perked up and he says, I like that idea. So he picked up the phone and he called another guy by the name of Floyd Spence. Does that name ring a bell to you, Joe? No. He was a United States congressman from Columbia who happened to chair the House Armed Services Committee. Thurmond chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee. So if those two guys said something to the military, guess what? It would happen. So we had, in March of 1995, a wonderful 2-hour hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee meeting room in Washington, D.C., and it was like something out of Hollywood. What a room. Here's all the Defense Department people. Here's Strom Thurmond and his people. We got big tables of Kimmels that have come from all over the country. We had a bunch of military brass and non-commissioned officers in the back who'd come there on their own to defend the Admiral. It was an amazing 2-hour exchange back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So at the end of that meeting, the senator says, are there any questions? And people started asking questions. And then I raised my hand. And I said, Senator, I want to thank you and Congressman Spence for making this hearing happen. Because had you not forced these men to be here, we never would have had this opportunity to exchange back and forth. But I'm afraid when we leave here, we're just going to go right back to the great paper chase. Isn't there something else we can do? And so Thurmond huddled with his staff members, blah, 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 blah. And then he looked over to the Secretary of Defense and he said, what do you think? And he said, Senator, I think we ought to take one more look at this thing. Okay, said Strom. But Strom said, I want to know what your findings are by the end of this year, which have been 9 months. All right? And he said, fine. December 31st, 1995, on my front door, who on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock is knocking on my door? There is a Federal Express delivery boy with a packet from the Secretary of Defense called the Dorn Report. Undersecretary Edwin Dorn had been assigned this job. And this was the Defense Department's summary of what had happened. And this report was being delivered all over the country to those people who were in this meeting. In that report, 80 pages, single space, was a lot of gobbledygook, but 3 things in there were very important to the Kimmels. Number one, an admission for the very first time on government stationery in writing. Kimmel and Short never should have been held solely responsible for what happened at Pearl Harbor. Great. Love it. Number 2, their words, not ours. Responsibility should be broadly shared. Yay, yay, yay. Absolutely, the responsibility should be broadly shared. And so with those bits of information, we said maybe we can do something more since now we have this admission from the Defense Department. So my dad went to work feverishly for several years thereafter, trying to get some type of legislation put in place that would make this happen. So we fast forward to the year 2000. There was a guy, my home state was Delaware. There was a guy that the Kimmels knew very well, who was a member of the United States Senate. Let me see, what was his name? Oh, it was Joe Biden. That's exactly right, Joe Biden, yeah. He co-sponsored legislation that was co-sponsored also by Senator Thurmond, Senator Bill Roth from Delaware, who's now deceased, John Spratt, all these people that basically said, Mr. President, correct this injustice to Kimmel and to Short. So the legislation got passed, and it was attached to the Floyd D. Spence Defense Authorization Bill of 2001. It was a non-binding resolution, which means non-binding. You can do with it what you want, but it's there. That was 2001. 2001. So we thought we were getting pretty close on this. 2001, brand new year, we got this legislation in place. America's kind of fat, dumb, and happy. There was this new movie coming out with Ben Affleck called Pearl Harbor. We said, oh my God, this is going to be great, because this was the 60th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, right? So everybody in America is all of a sudden re-interested in Pearl Harbor. We're getting
seems like perfect timing.
It's perfect timing. So we thought, exactly. So we got interviewed by NBC, CBS.
Trent, can you pull up a picture of Admiral Kimmel? Can you Google that? Well, just while we talk about it, I want to see this guy.
So, we were interviewed by a number of major networks in various forms. We never got a long form like this. It was 60 seconds here, 90 seconds here, that kind of stuff. So we got all this publicity. America was getting, there he is.
There he is.
There he is. America was getting an instant history lesson about Pearl Harbor. And the storyline was exactly what I'm telling you here. In fact, when the movie came out, my dad offered his services to Disney, which was the producer for this movie, pro bono, because he was worried about the storyline. What's Hollywood going to come up with? Is it going to be, something goofy, or will it be accurate? Well, once you take the love story out of there, it was a perfect story. It was absolutely wonderful. So here we are. Bam, we're just moving. We are moving. And George Bush is the president, George W. Bush. We just felt like we're this close to getting it. Everything was in our way. Everything was wonderful until 9/11, 2001. We know what happened then, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's when the whole world order changed. Wherever we were in the pecking order, we fell right off the tracks. The resolution is still there. And here we are 20 plus years later. And
Joe Biden in the White House.
Well, there he is.
Do you have a battle line?
Again. He said, what is this? What is this? So, interestingly enough, when Biden was campaigning here in Rock Hill, when he was a vice presidential candidate with President Obama, we had a chance to meet him through the spracious efforts of some of the local politicians. And he remembered the whole story. He thought we had this whole thing done. In fact, John Spratt took us to a campaign event in Columbia and arranged for me to go up with John to meet Joe Biden. I got a picture in my office of it. I had 60 seconds, and I had a one-page summary of here we are. As I walked up, I said, Mr. Biden, you don't remember who Yeah, I do, Manning. How are you? Fine. I said, I need you to help me finish what you got started. You mean it's not done yet? It's not done? No, it's not done. I thought for sure we were going to get it done. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen. So this goes on and on. Then we get to the 75th anniversary year, right? That was 5 years ago. 75th anniversary year, just prior to that, well, I'd say about a year and a half before the 75th, we were approached by a Pulitzer Prize winning crew, authors, Anthony Summers and Robin Swan. They wanted to do a book on Pearl Harbor, on my grandfather. Well, nobody had really ever written a book about my grandfather. We said, great, we'd love to. And they said, well, there's just a couple of conditions. Number one, this is our book and not your book. Whatever conclusions we reach, are ours, fine. And number two, we want to be able to interview you as part of this, fine. And number three, whatever you have in personal archive material we want to have access to. We said, fine, wonderful. They went about it. So they wrote this book. And here's the funny part. The book is coming out just during the November period, just a couple of weeks before the actual 75th anniversary. Joe Biden is campaigning back here in Rock Hill. I've got, I can't believe it. We tried to get him to quote a quote for the book, but the White House lawyers said, no, you're not going to allow that because of all these political reasons. So I said, maybe the thing to do is I can get Biden to put a copy of the book on Obama's desk. That's all I want him to do, put a copy of the book on the desk. And Obama's going to say, what's this all about? And Joe can tell him, and we'll get this thing taken care of. That never happened. Never happened. In fact, the last trip that he was here, he was speaking at the large church hall down there on Saluda Street. I couldn't get to him that particular time, but a Secret Service lady said, what is it that you need to have done? And I had a copy of the book, another copy of the book. I said, can you just give this to Mr. Biden and have him put it on Barack Obama's desk? That's all I want. Sure, I'll get that done for you. She comes back 5 minutes later. She said, done, all done. Oh, great. 24 to 36 hours later, I get a call from the local Democratic Party. Manning, we have your book for you. I said, what? What do you mean you get my book for me? Oh, well, Biden autographed your book. I said, he autographed my book. Are you kidding me? So I got the book, and I have it in my at home. And on the title page where it says A Matter of Honor, Joe Biden says, and it is, ... keep the faith, signs it and dates it. I got that book. Last opportunity was when his wife Jill came to speak at Winthrop University 2 weeks later. I took another copy of the book, asked her to give it to Joe to do the same thing. Never happened. I don't know why it never happened. It doesn't make any sense to me because if you'll remember, there was such a love fest between Obama and Biden at the end of their term. I mean, he gave him that great big presidential medal. Mm-hmm. You know, Biden was in tears and all that. It never got done. A simple thing like this never got done. Story's not over yet, Joel. You worn out?
Not at all.
You sure? All right. I don't know how much.
I have a long list of questions all about this in my head, so let's keep going.
Oh, Lord. All right, so here we are. We have no resolution. We have a resolution, but nobody's paid any attention to it. You have to understand that I have my father at this time is deceased. His older brother, Tom, is also deceased. There was a third brother, Manning, who was my namesake, who was killed in World War II. He's a submarine commander. So the Admiral had three children, Manning, Tom, and Ned. Ned was my daddy. He gave me his older brother's name. So they're all gone. Well, Tom, my Uncle Tom, had a son, Tommy, who was another Naval Academy graduate. When he left the Navy, he went to work for the FBI, and he was a big research kind of guy. In fact, because of his research, he was the one who actually made the connection with the authors who wrote the book, A Matter of Honor, which, by the way, was made into a History Channel documentary by another name. I would recommend it to anybody. I mean, I don't make a penny off the book, so don't understand that. I just want you to read the book. It's very well written. It's an easy read. It reads like a thriller. It's just unbelievable. So here we are. We've got all this information. There is no more research that needs to be done about this. The facts are very clear. And what the authors brought forth in their book was even more damning, and I'm not going to take time here to tell you about that. You've about had enough of this. So my cousin Tom was just a researcher. He just loved to research, and he kept working on this thing. I said, Tommy, you go that direction. I'm going the political direction because I think I can make something happen here. So Tommy found an opportunity to go to a federal department called the Board of Correction of Naval Records, BCNR. They are there to represent the aggrieved party who may think that the military has done something wrong to them. My uncle and my dad tried that route 20, 25 years prior to that, and the BCNR would not even accept the application. But when Tommy went to them, they said, sure, send it on in here. Well, Tommy was a research freak. I mean, he just had research like you wouldn't believe. And he built this application over about a year and a half. It was a biggie. I didn't realize how big it was until after it was submitted. Well, the bottom line of that is they turned it down. They turned it down. Tommy passed away here about 2 years ago. I get a call out of nowhere one day on the way home from work from a fellow by the name of Colonel Bradley Good. Bradley works for the BCNR. He is the advocate for the petitioner, and he called to say he was sorry to hear about Tommy. Is there anything new that can be added to his application? Because they'll go through it again. Well, I said, my gosh, all this new stuff that I'm sure Tommy had in his application that was in the book, blah, 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 blah. He said, I read that whole application. I didn't see any of that in there. I said, really? He said, I tell you what, why don't you write an amended application, send it in here, and we'll go about this again. I said, okay. So I called the authors of the book, Anthony Summers and Robin Swan. They live in Cork, Ireland. Beautiful place right along a river. They're just a wonderful couple. And I said, I need this, 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 and this so I can write this amended application. We're not going to give it to you. I said, what do you mean you're not going to give it to me? we're going to write the application for you. I said, really? Yeah, we want to do this. Because their knowledge of all the T's and the I's, they just have a wealth of knowledge on this thing. So they did. They wrote this wonderful amended application, probably about 20 pages long, with a bunch of supporting materials. We submitted it to the BCNR. So here we go. The BCNR took the application and in a reasonable period of time acted upon it. That's step one. I don't know whether it was yay or nay. I have no idea. It goes from there to the office of the Secretary of Navy. Nomenclature, OSN. You talk to these military people, it's all initials. OSN. The OSN, oddly enough, on December 7th, 2020, they do what their due diligence and pass it on to the OSD. You know what that is? Office of Secretary of Defense, where it sat for a year. Nothing happened. Let me say that again. Nothing happened. So I have been routinely talking with Bradley Good, and he's stymied by this thing as well. So once again, I start to unleash relationships that we have built with elected officials, and we've been on both sides of the political aisle. You have to understand, in Washington, D.C., if you have a Republican president, you deal with Republican members of Congress. If you have a Democratic president, you deal with Democratic people. So in this case, we've been dealing with some Democratic people, which is fine. Jim Clyburn has been very helpful with us, Congressman Clyburn. We've had Senator Chris Combs, who's one of Biden's buddies from Delaware, working on this thing for us. And they finally got the Office of Secretary of Defense to wake up, and they kicked it back to the Office of the Secretary of the Navy, because there had been a new Secretary of Navy put in since they originally shipped it over there. This just goes back and forth. So they, once again, did whatever they did. We don't know whether it's a yay or nay, and they have sent it back to the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And as we are recording this, on whatever day this is, March the something, what is the day?
11th, I think?
The 11th, 2022. It is still sitting at the Office of Secretary of Defense. And I'm told that they may render whatever their decision is going to be here very shortly. Mm-hmm. We'll see. From there, it goes, the last stop is to the White House. Now, if we can get it over there to the White House, I don't care whether it's been approved or disapproved. If we can just get it over there to the White House, maybe we can get the president's eyes on it. Because this is, understand, we are not looking for any back pay. We're not looking for a parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. We're just looking for a matter of honor, a piece of paper, one sentence. We posthumously restore the rank of Admiral Husband Kimmel to his 4-star rank. Now, why do we want that? In 1948, the United States Congress, 47, the United States Congress passed a piece of legislation called the Officer Personnel Act. What was that? It was a way that the government thanked all its flag and general officers for their service during World War II. They retired everybody at their highest wartime rank so they could get the best benefits, the best GI stuff, so, the pensions and all that kind of stuff. Hundreds and hundreds of names sent over, except 2, Kimmel and Short. So once again, the scapegoating is continuing, right? Now, again, we don't want the money. We don't want any of that kind of stuff. We just want to get the honor restored, because to a military man, honor is above life itself. So that's pretty much where we are. Are you exhausted yet?
So you have the name of the book. You've mentioned this, The Honor.
A Matter of Honor.
A Matter of Honor.
By Summers and Swan.
Is that what fuels this multi-generational quest?
Yep, exactly.
And why? How was this conveyed to young Manning Kimmel?
If it wasn't conveyed
at a young age.
Let me tell you.
How did this happen to you?
There's something in my bloodstream called PhDNA. That's what I'm calling it. I didn't really relate to any of this kind of stuff until I got into my early 20s. In fact, I knew my grandfather. My grandfather passed away when I was, a junior in college. And as a young lad, my dad would take us up to Groton, Connecticut, where my grandfather lived. And he was a grandfather to me.
Beautiful place.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. We'd sit there and he just, we'd do all kinds of stuff together, but we never talked Pearl Harbor. But my grandfather and my father walked right down the hallway back to his room and study, and they talked about Pearl Harbor all the time. So somewhere in that osmosis, my DNA kicked in. Mm-hmm. And I saw my dad, he worked on this, he worked on this, he worked on this, and he worked on this. And Dad was a very practical guy. And he used to say, you know what? Maybe it's going to take another generation to solve and correct this problem. You would love, as a lawyer, to read some of the things my dad has written on this thing. It's incredible what he's done. But he was not able to get it across the goal line. He got everything that I just told you about. That legislation was really all his work.
Do you think your grandfather ever had to ask him to take that up, or did he just
No.
did it?
He just did it. You have to understand, all the boys in his family were naval officers. All of them.
Including your father?
Including my father. Mm-hmm. He went into war. He was at Princeton. And when the war broke out, he left Princeton and served his time. And then when he came out, he went to this law school up there. What was that called? In Cambridge. What was it called? Harvard. Yeah. Yeah. He was the brains of the family. I never got his genes, but he was just a great guy, and he just had more common sense. But he worked all the time on this thing. And I guess just watching that day in and day out at home, I just kicked in, and so I've been a team member, and now I find myself being the captain.
Well, in addition to just seeing your father's efforts and absorbing it that way, how was the concept of honor conveyed to you, and how do you understand that and what that meant to your grandfather and your uncles and everyone else that was involved in it?
Well, I just go back to what I said a little while ago. Mm-hmm. I never served in the military. I was one of these guys that didn't pass the military physical, so I didn't go through. I'm not a veteran, but I've been around enough military people all my life, particularly when I was young. When we would go to see my grandfather in Groton, we would go to the naval bases, and everybody would be doing all these saluting things, and I got to understand a little bit about what the military was. And then as I grew older, I appreciated the role of the military and what they mean to this country, and we wouldn't have this country if it weren't for the military. Simple as that. But when I asked him at a young age, why is this thing so important, this honor thing? And that's when he blisterly stuck his finger in my face and told me, to a military man, honor is above life itself. It just rung. I got it. Duty, honor, country. It's just there. I mean, that's where I picked up on this.
So Admiral Kimmel, you mentioned he kind of rose into that position partly due to relationship with FDR. Yeah. FDR knew who he was, but I'm sure it wasn't by pure accident of name recognition or relationship.
No.
What about husband Kimmel made him rise to the rank of admiral? Because that just doesn't happen by accident.
He had, and I can't quantify it for you because I don't know all the positions, but I got a closet full of stuff. He was a brilliant military tactician. In fact, you would like this. Prior to him being tricked into retirement, he was working on a battle plan that later became part of what we know was a turning point in the war for the United States at Midway. That's where we took out a bunch of the Japanese carriers. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you exactly what portion of that, but he was working on that. I will tell you something else that was very interesting. You ever heard of a guy by the name of Nimitz?
As in the...
As the other admiral?
Yeah.
He was a junior officer to my grandfather. Mm-hmm. And when the attack occurred and when my grandfather was forced out, they took this guy Nimitz and told him to take over Kimmel's job. Nimitz reissued Admiral Kimmel's port readiness orders without one change in them. Without one change. For those people out there who say Kimmel didn't know what he was doing, well, then you might as well say Nimitz didn't know what he was doing either.
Yeah. And look how we honor him.
Yeah, exactly. And let me just add one more thing that kind of is a burr under my saddle.
Yeah.
You heard about a guy by the name of MacArthur?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a big Army guy. He was over there somewhere, what was it, in the Philippines? Mm-hmm. He heard about this attack at Pearl Harbor, had 8 or 10 or 12 hours worth of advance notice, was told to do this, this, and this, and he didn't do any of it. And the Japanese came in and strafed and wiped out his whole installation there. And he was honored as a hero. Hello? Is there something wrong here?
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you. So,
what made Kimmel such a good leader? In addition to his strategic competence, what made him an admirable leader, or a leader of men, or the right man for the position?
I think the best way I can answer that, because I never saw him leading men, was when I saw a number of those who served under him come to his defense when he was under attack by the military brass. We had one gentleman who lived in Henderson, Kentucky, captain, and I cannot remember his last name. He worked with my father all the time. Let's do this, let's do this. He wrote all these different papers. One day, he called and he said, "You know what, Manning?" And my dad was alive at this time. He said, "We need to go down to Washington and protest." I said, "Excuse me?" He says, "We need to go to Washington and protest." I said, "Okay, this sounds like fun." He says, "I'll take care of getting all the permits and do all this kind of stuff." Oh, all right. So we picked whatever, we were down there for 2 or 3 days. We picked the hottest days in Washington, D.C., and trust me, if you think it's hot here in the Carolinas, go to that swamp down in Washington.
Actual swamp.
It's a swamp. So we went down there. We got our permit. We were allowed this particular space behind the White House to set up our tent. And I remember I took the radio station tent down there. It had all the logos on it. And the park police came and said, "You can't have logos." So we had to turn the tent inside out. We said, fine. We set up our tables. We had literature to hand out and what have you. And you would I've got pictures of this. I wish I should have brought them with me, where we actually had placards, restore Admiral Kimmels' rank, all this. And we would march around the White House. Every hour we would take this forced march, as I used to call it. Take us about a half hour to do the walk. We'd come back, sit down, drink for water for about a half hour, and we go do it again. And we did this for like 2.5 days. Only to find out that the president was not there. He was out of the country or someplace. But what really stuck in my mind was, number one, that here's this guy who served as an officer under my grandfather, who worked with him all these years. He didn't have to do this, but he respected my grandfather enough to stay with us all these years. And I might add, what started all this was back in the early 1980s, when the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association, this is all the people who survived the attack on Pearl Harbor, unbeknownst to us, adopted these glorious resolutions. It's sitting in my desk, asking the president to correct this injustice that Kimmel and Short and we're just great guys, da-da-da-da-da. And that's when my dad said, well, you know what, maybe the sense of the country has changed and we need to get to work on this. So that's what all these people, they didn't have to do this. These are people who lost, their fellow officers and seamen down there. But they came together and said, Kimmel served us the way he should have served us. He was a leader. And then this gentleman, the captain, I can't think of his last name, it's terrible, took us on this forced march. And we did all this stuff. He has since passed away. But I mean, it was a remarkable experience. And when I left Washington, D.C., I said, you know what? Despite me being so upset with the way Washington is treating my grandfather, look at what I was able to do. I came down here and peacefully protested, had my placards and all that stuff, and I can go home. I don't have to worry about being thrown in the gulag.
Still a great country.
It's still a great country.
So despite 80 years of frustration, if you allow yourself a glimmer of optimism and hope and imagine that, man, what if while Biden is in office that this thing gets done? What does that mean for your familial catharsis? Like, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the Kimmels and as a clan? What would that moment actually be like?
It's almost unimaginable to me. I have no idea. Let me tell you this. My father, as I told you back for the 60th anniversary, we thought we were very, very close to getting this done. One day I'm up there at the house. My mom and dad are up there in Dad's study, and they're planning this big party, this great big celebration. And he had a little tabbed notebook, and he was writing all the people down he was going to invite. And then he had a menu. We're going to have this, we're going to have this, we're going to have this, we're going to have this. And then when it came to the beverages, he put down this thing that said, no cheap liquor.
It's celebratory. Only the good stuff.
So I still have that. And my plans are, if we are successful in getting this done, we're going to have some kind of a celebration. I don't know what it's going to be, where it's going to be, but I'm going to make sure that is honored. No cheap liquor. For those who like to have a cocktail, there'll be no cheap liquor. But, all I can say is, that for me, I can't say it'll be a yoke off I don't feel like this is a yoke on me. Mm-hmm. Quite frankly, I'm honored to be able to do this for a guy that I knew. And he was just a grandpa. He was a grandpa. You would do this for your grandfather, right? But you'd be a lot better at it than I am because you're a lawyer. Right.
Well, you talk about generations. So you have children.
Oh yeah.
Have your children taken an interest in this quest? I mean, have they said, "Don't worry, Dad. Like, we'll work on this." Where does it stand? Kind of.
Well, I am committed to getting this thing resolved before I say bye-bye. Because it's unfair to them. It is so far removed from them.
They didn't know your grandfather.
Oh, my Lord, no. My gosh. My kids aren't that old.
Right.
But it's, my youngest son has shown some interest in this thing. But really, if he's that far removed from it, what about the people he's going to have to deal with? They're going to be so far removed from it. My golden opportunity is...
Might that help, though? I mean, do you think time... I don't know. Because obviously there was a lot of political, personal, like when the people that were involved were still in these bureaucratic offices, like spread throughout Washington, it seems like there was like a personal vendetta or political vendetta to just not only to just destroy him, but not even allow him to display any degree of competence after the fact, like remove him from jobs. Does that removal of time and, taking those people out of the equation, it
doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that the military is never going to take responsibility for anything.
Sure. They don't want to say, hey, you're right. We were the ones who screwed up.
They're never going to say that. No. Interesting little sidebar story. I told you that Harold Stark, who was the chief of naval operations, was a very close friend of my grandfather's. After all this, and after my grandfather found out how badly his so-called friend had treated him, he sat down and wrote this letter that we found long after my grandfather died. And it was a pretty tough letter to Stark. It said words like, "How could you, a close friend of mine, lie to me and allow me to go through this? How could you treat your beloved Navy this way?" And the list goes on and on. And then he said, "I hope my memory is permanently my memory of you is permanently removed, and I never hear your name again." But the letter was never sent.
Wow.
It's in the book, though.
Yeah.
It's in the book. So, to answer your question, I don't know how I'll feel. I mean, I just will be glad that it's over with. But I really have been honored to do this. Yes, it takes time. I'm sure my wife will be glad that we're not talking about this anymore, although she's been very, very supportive all these years. Anything I had to do, go do it. Go get it done. She says, "Just don't ask me to come to another Pearl Harbor presentation. I've heard them all."
Well, I want to get to the Manning part of the story too. So I got to ask this. So you have this like strong connection, your familial connection, incredible roots in the Northeast Delaware. How in the world does that guy end up in Rock Hill, South Carolina, of all places?
Oh boy. Well, my first broadcasting business was in a small town in western Maryland called Cumberland, Maryland, way out on the neck of Maryland. I was there, owned a broadcasting business there for about 7 or 8 years.
This is a radio station?
Radio station, yep. I got into the radio business in Wilmington, Delaware. You want me to get into that? How I got into radio?
So journalism, is that?
No.
Yeah, okay.
No, not at all.
Okay, get me there. All right, get us there.
I understand. Back in the Stone Ages, before they taught journalism in school, when I came out of college, I had a draft number of 13. And Vietnam was right there. I told you that I failed the physical. I actually was going to go to law school and had missed the window to take the law boards and all that stuff. My dad, being the bright guy that he was, knew doggone well that I wasn't cut out to be a lawyer. But he wanted me to find that out for myself. So I went to work for a law firm, kind of like Schiller and Hamilton. And I actually went there and worked about 40 hours a week. I think I made $40 a week. I mean, it was that long ago. I answered the phones. I learned how to do title searches, helped out with pleadings and interrogatories, all that kind of stuff. And I realized I'm not a lawyer. That's not me. So when I was just kind of, what am I going to do? And my friend Eddie Brown just loves to tell this story. I took the test. There was a place in Philadelphia, which is very close to Wilmington, Delaware, called the Human Engineering Laboratory. They take lost souls like me. They sit down and they say, let's take all these stupid little tests. Let's build blocks. Let's listen to this. Let's take word association tests, da-da-da-da. And we're going to find out what makes you tick. So 3 days later, I come back and they say, here's what makes you tick. Here are your strengths. Here are your weaknesses. As far as this law thing, you could get through it, but don't do it because by the time you're 40, you're going to hate it and you'll be looking for something else. Okay. How about coming down here? Oh, broadcasting. I said, what the heck is broadcasting? Because back then, nobody ever heard the word. Radio, television. Oh, went back, told my story to my dad. He kind of lit up like a Christmas tree. He knew a guy who owned a radio station in Wilmington, Delaware by the name of Ewing Hawkins. I went to meet Mr. Hawkins. Hawkins said, you don't want to get in this business, blah, 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 blah. And I said, yeah, this is, as soon as I walked in there, Joel, and saw all this equipment and all these gear, one of the things I showed up strong was I was a gadget guy, right? So he let me hang around at night after I finished my law job. And these guys were great. They taught me how to do this and taught me how to do that and da-da-da-da-da. And after about 6 or 8 months of this, Hawkins said, you're probably good enough to go out and get your first job. And I got my first job in a little small town called Salem, New Jersey. Worked there for about a year or so. Worked part-time at some radio stations in Wilmington, Delaware. Got a full-time job back in Wilmington, Delaware. And then I said, you know what, if I'm going to keep on with this, I got to get on the other side of the business because I just don't want to do this all the time. I want to do this as well. So I set out on this great adventure to try to buy a radio station. And that's a whole nother story, and I don't know whether you want me to get into that here, but it was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. I feel that I have lived the great American dream because when I found this radio station in Western Maryland, I was working with another guy at the time. What little money we had lost trying to evaluate other stations. We had nothing, but we found this station, and we wanted to buy this station. So we signed this paperwork, being stupid people, and we had to put a 1% down payment on the line. Well, this is back in the late 70s. The station had a sale price of $250,000, so we needed to put $2,500 down. We didn't have it. So we each took our credit cards. We went to the bank and got $1,250 a piece, put it down there, and then said, what the hell are we going to do now? It's because we had 90 days in which to close. So that's when I learned the value of a good attorney, blue skies, private offerings, all this kind of stuff. And we started knocking on doors with our offering circular. We raised enough money the night before to go to closing.
The night before?
The night before closing. Maybe it was 2 nights before, but
down to the wire.
Down to the wire. We had just enough to close. But our attorney, being a smart guy, he says, listen, we got to go down to Washington, D.C. to close this. These guys that are selling this station are a bunch of, his words, shysters. They're going to try to mess this whole thing up. You have to follow my lead. No matter what I do, you follow my lead. Okay, yes, sir. So we got down there, and sure enough, these guys, we're not going to pay this bill in full. We'll just pay a piece of that, and we'll come back. Oh, no. Finally, our attorney had enough of that. And he was a small-statured guy. He got up, stood up, took his fist on a table 10 times longer than this, banged it as loud as he can, and said, what do you think we are, a bunch of GD farmers? And we walked out of there. Oh, my God. And I'm sitting there, what is he doing? We're walking out of this thing. And we literally got to the elevator and we pressed the down button. When they came running down, oh, come back. And the attorney said, okay, that cost you $15,000. And we're going to do this the way we're supposed to do it. And we did, closed it out. We had $3,000 of operating capital and said, what do we do now? I never sold a thing in my life, never managed a thing in my life. Bingo. So it worked out. We were there. I was there 7 or 8 years. It was time for me to move on. I had young boys. I wanted to go someplace where there was opportunity. I wanted to get back south because I had gone to school in the South. Mm-hmm. And long story short, ended up with this opportunity.
So did you go to Sewanee?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought, yeah.
The University of the South.
Not just a school in the South, the actual University of the South.
The University of the South. That's right, and Sewane in Tennessee. So opportunity was here. Mm-hmm. Allan and I hooked up. My partner.
This would have been what year?
1984.
Well, so last time we were here, we had Stephen Turner in here.
And
he told us all about what Rock Hill looked like in 1984.
Oh, my God.
So you can't tell me that you rode through Rock Hill and said, this looks like the land of opportunity.
In fact, I'll tell you, Turner was exactly right.
Yeah.
I had an uncle who lived in Charlotte at the time, Uncle Freddie. I stopped to see Uncle Freddie before we ever put a foot in York County. Uncle Freddie said, glad to see you, but Manning, do not invest any money in a business in Rock Hill. It is upside down. The textile industry has ruined the city. High unemployment, people don't have jobs. Blah, blah. Well, I put together this evaluation form, asking a bunch of questions. I had about 5 cities to look at different opportunities. And I graded it numerically and just added up the score at the end of this. And what Uncle Freddie said was exactly true, but I saw it through a different lens. And I said, I think this is it. And boy, I just wish Uncle Freddie was alive now.
What was that lens? How and why? Like, why were you able to see?
You have to understand where I was coming from. They didn't know what the stress was down here. In Cumberland, Maryland, which is still not a growth community by any means. A lot of union labor up there. A couple of major manufacturers that have gone out. It's just. I still pinch myself from time to time to realize how blessed I was for the good Lord to lead me on down here. But the lens that I had to make that evaluation was different than my Uncle Freddie, who was in Charlotte, right? I just saw it. It just looked a lot better than where I was coming from.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
Not that Charlotte was some booming metropolis back then either. So.
But compared to where I had lived for 7 years
in
a small town of 25,000 to come to this big metro area, woo, this is big time. So we worked at, Allan was here. And
how did you know Allan?
I didn't.
Okay.
I met him. He was station manager at the time. And he and I decided we were going to do this thing together. So we took the infamous walk around the block.
So wait, describe that when you first met Allan. I mean, so you were looking for a market to go buy into, basically.
Right.
So did you just knock on the door and say, hey, I'm interested in...
No. They have, in the broadcasting business, they have brokers, just like they do in real estate, except they specialize in media. So the broker was the one who made us aware of this opportunity. And the broker was the one who set up the opportunity to come knock on the door and take a look at stuff.
So at that point, was he looking for a partner? Was he actively engaged in trying to buy the business? Or
no, at the time he was the station manager.
Gotcha.
For the fellow who owned the business at the time, who lived out of town. He was never here local. But Allan and I just hit it off from day one, and we decided we're going to do this thing together. And so
you took the walk.
We took the walk around the block.
Literally and figuratively. Tell me about the walk. Yeah.
The walk. When we figured we were going to do this thing, how are we going to do it? All right, so we walked around the block. The radio stations at Confederate and White Streets. So we walked around the block and had this big discussion, thought we had to figure it out. Nope, we need to take another walk around the block. So we did two laps around the block, and we figured out how to basically divide the business as far as responsibilities. Who's going to do what and how it's going to work. And we just had a handshake, and we did it. And that's the way it's been for pushing 38 years. Never had, that's the way it's done, and it's worked fine. And we grew it. We've grown the station from just WRHI at 1340 to now 6 different signals with 4 different formats on there. And all the other signals are FM signals, and we've just grown the enterprise, and the community's been great, and it's grown, and we've been very involved in the community, as you are, and that makes a difference in terms of establishing relationships and talking about things that we need to talk about. Because, as you know, our flagship, RHI, is a very community-based oriented. That's what we do. We 100%. Talk about the community. That's what we do.
Where did that come from? So when you and Allan first started this, was the station already very community? The people involved with the station, were they engaged in the community? Was that a continuation?
No.
Is that Manning and Allan saying, what, this is what we believe in?
That's pretty much
it. Did it just happen? Like, kind of describe how organic and what that process was.
It's hard to imagine what was being done back then. Most radio stations back 40 years ago were playing a lot of music. There were some local promotions that Allan had put together. But as far as a news talk station type of format with that kind of programming, no. That's something that we pretty quickly put together and got on the air. Of course, it's changed, and now it's morphed into what we have now. And technology has allowed us to do so much more, which is a whole nother program about how we can do what we do through the advent of technology. But that's what we needed to make the station grow. We're in a business. We're in a business that's designed to make money. We got salaries to pay, just like you do here at Schiller and Hamilton. You got to pay for this light bill. Got to pay this technician over here, right? So we have to generate dollars. And to generate dollars, what's going to make people listen to us when you've got a major market right next door to you? Well, what's going to make them listen to you is stuff that's local. So we do a lot of local sports, a lot of community promotions, which you're very aware of. And that's what's brought people to us.
You do a lot of local news, but you personally and Allan Miller are very involved in different activities in the community and bettering the community.
We're following your lead.
Well, yeah, right. I've tried to live up to the standard that y'all are setting, which I fail miserably at. But my question is, I'm trying to think of this in the context of your family and kind of where you came from, and you have this long history of service in the military arena, in the Navy. Do you see a connection between your public service in the community and this like familial history? Is this something that you also feel was kind of imparted to you? Is this unique to you? Where does this come from for you?
I got to say, probably most of it comes from my dad. I used to watch what my dad used to do. He was very involved with his church. He was very involved with, he did a lot of pro bono work. As I told you, he was an attorney, but he was a corporate attorney. But when he had free time, he was always working with the Delaware justice system. He was working with, prisoners who had issues, with this and with that. So I just, he was involved with the Scouts. So I guess that's where it kind of kicked in as far as, me getting involved. But really the industry, the broadcasting industry, is all about the people who you're trying to serve. We pretty much subscribe to the old form of how radio was originally conceived, and that is to service to the community. Yes, we have different stations that offer different things, but we're always focused in on the communities that we serve. We're not trying to be a radio station in Charlotte. Charlotte's got 50 or so good radio stations doing their own thing, but what makes us who we are, why people would listen to us and not to somebody else, is because we're all about Rock Hill, Fort Mill, TKK, York County. That's why we go to county council meetings. That's why we go to city council meetings. That's why we get involved with high school football, and why we do the Come See Me parades, and why we do the Easter Egg Classic, and why we do Toys for Happy. It's all part and parcel of what we do.
Is that where the idea to do Straight Talk came from?
Straight. That is interesting. I had done a talk show in Maryland, and of all things, it was not called Straight Talk. But I had done that on a daily basis. So when I arrived in Rock Hill, I was going back there through the rooms and the old studios, and I noticed this sign back there called Straight Talk. And I said to Allan, what is this thing? And he said, well, it's a show that used to be on the air, but we took it off for whatever reason. And I said, well, hey, guess what? I raised my hand to do this because this is the kind of stuff I enjoy. And so we got Straight Talk started, and we did it for 20 years right around the corner from you at Thursdays 2 restaurant. You remember Thursdays?
Oh, yeah.
No longer there. A dear friend of mine by the name of Larry Bigham, who's no longer with us, he came to me one day. He was so funny. He said, Kimmel, he said, we've just sold the restaurant, and you're not part of the assets.
Imagine
that. Imagine that. So we bumped around at a couple of other places, and we've landed at Substation 2, right across from Winthrop, and we've been there probably about 8 years. But the show has been on the air 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year for 37 and a half years. I don't think there's any other radio station in the country that can say that.
No.
Now, it ain't the talent that's behind the microphone. It's the people there who have got engaging stories to tell about what they do. And most of these people are just community guys like you and me who are telling what they're doing. I mean, when I bring you on there, we talk about your role on the York County Council. I can bring somebody on there from a community group about a blood drive they're doing. Or I can bring an author to there. Or I can go right across the street to Winthrop University. I bring all kinds of economists on. And people who can, put out information that is interesting to people. I did a show just the other day. Every once in a while we hit a snafu into scheduling, and I did this just yesterday. And I said, guess what, Charlie Charlie Ruffalo, who owns Substation 2, sit down here. We had a fascinating program about what this supply chain inflationary period that we're going through is doing to his business. And he's just a microcosm of what's happening in the entire hospitality industry. It was I had more people talk to me about that show, and they didn't realize this and they didn't realize that, and how well Charlie articulated it. This is right from the mouth of the guy who runs the business. So that's what makes Straight Talk go, is the people. It's right from, as Patty Mercer always says, right from the source.
Yeah.
So
when you first started doing Straight Talk, did you ever think that I'm going to run out of people to talk to? Because you do it every day.
Well, I have this fabulous person who's been part of my life for 48 years by the name of Sheila.
Fantastic scheduler.
There she is. Now, the funny story is that she's tried to quit this job a couple of times. And I told her the first time she can't quit. I up come quitting. I said, you cannot quit. I said, I'm quitting. Please don't do this. So technology had gotten to the point, this is years and years and years ago, where we could start doing things outside of the office. And so she agreed to keep up with it. And that's the way it's pretty much been, although every once in a while she says, I want to quit. But she is the brains behind this thing. She schedules all the people, makes sure that they're there with follow-ups. And that's a full-time, part-time job when you're scheduling. I mean, for every guest that you're able to schedule, there's going to be probably 2 or 3 other calls of people who can't make it. And she's got this massive log of everybody who's ever been on that show as long as she's been doing the scheduling. It's amazing. When you do the math on that, I mean, you're pushing 10,000 shows.
Wow.
Now, we've had a lot of the same people on, but not that often. I mean, we might get a Joel Hamilton on there a couple times a year, but that's 2 shows out of 260 or 70.
And in this tiny little community of Rock Hill, you just find this wealth of people that you can sit down and interview.
Everybody has a story.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, I could take this young man right here and put him right where you are, and we would have a fascinating discussion.
It'd be way more interesting than whatever I'm
doing. No. And I could pin your ears back too. Right. But I'm saying everybody has a story.
Yeah.
Your other attorneys and your administrative staff people here, everybody's got a story.
So you might have already gotten ahead of me. So you don't do 10,000 shows of anything unless you just love it. You've got to have a love or a passion for it.
I just love it.
What do you love about it?
I just like people and I just like to hear what they do. The ideal job for me, besides doing what I'm doing now, would be to have somebody give me a motorhome and we want you to be Charles Kuralt. Just go across the country and doing what you're doing. Charlie Kuralt had the greatest job in the world. He'd stop anywhere and talk to people.
Yep.
But we've got enough people to talk to right here in our own community, and I like being home. And every day there's more new people coming here. I ran into a lady just the other day. I'd never met her before in my life. She said, you used to live in Cumberland, Maryland. I said, how'd you know that? Well, I was looking on your website. She said, I spent 17 years there. And bingo, we just started talking about her experiences there, places that we both remember, why she left. I mean, I could have sat down and done a 30-minute show with her.
So you've done 10,000 of these. What makes a good show? What makes a good interview?
Somebody who likes to talk about, somebody who is passionate about what they do and wants to share that enthusiasm with others. That's what makes a good show. And I can tell you that 99% of the people I talk to are exactly that way. Some who've never been in front of a microphone before get kind of freaky. Say, oh, I don't know how this is going to work. And I tell them, look, we've never had to call 911. So don't worry, nothing's going to put you on the floor here. And just talk to me. It's just you and me talking. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people out there listening, but just talk to me. Don't worry about these. And we don't have cameras, so that's less, they're less inhibitive as a result of that. It's not, I don't know, it's just people like to, I like to talk to people, and I think I can do it in a way that's non-confrontational. I've interviewed, I can't tell you how many different elected officials.
And sometimes you have to ask them tough questions.
Sometimes I do, but I am not a gotcha kind of interviewer.
Right.
There are tough discussions that have to be had, but there's a way to have those tough discussions and be civil. Because if somebody leaves the microphone and is mad at me, what good is that going to do? It's not going to do any good at all. I'll never get them back there again.
Especially in a small community.
Especially in a small community, although we're getting bigger. But this is a smaller community. these are the people that, I have lunch with, I go to church with, I see them just like you do.
Well, if it is an elected official or whoever it is, there's a good chance you've known them for 10 or 15, for a long time. These are people you've never met before when they're sitting down across from you. How do you prepare? So when you know you have an interview coming up, I mean, is it different depends on what you have coming up? Like Sheila says, hey, Manning, this is who you're interviewing this week.
You want the truth or you want to lie?
A little bit of both.
The truth is I have a piece of paper that has, my Straight Talk guests on it, my sponsorship information and all that. And this is the God's truth. I don't know why I'm able to do this, but I do. I mean, it's just me. I say to the guest, I tell them what the format is and how things are going to work. And I say, here's my list of prepared questions. And they look at it and they said, it's a blank sheet of paper.
Well, that's my list.
That's your same thing. So you got the same skill set.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is because I learned a long time ago from reading a book by a guy by the name of Larry King.
Yeah.
Or Larry King. I actually met him one time.
People have referred to you as the Larry King of Rock Hill. So
yeah. Well, Larry King, in one of his books, always said, I really don't prepare for interviews because if I do, then I'm going to have a head full of knowledge, which means that I probably won't ask questions that need to be asked so that the average listener out there can know about what we're talking about from square one. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's why I normally start by saying, tell me a little bit about you personally. Because I know Joel Hamilton knows a ton of people, but Joel Hamilton doesn't know everybody, especially in this town that's growing as quickly as it is.
Yeah.
So you'll take 30 seconds and you'll tell us a little bit about your background. And then we get into whatever the topic matter is. It's just my way of trying to introduce one part of the community to another part of the community. But I have no background, no nothing. Now, every once in a while, if I get somebody like a Lindsey Graham in there's so many things that I want to talk to him about. I will take a piece of scratch paper and I'll put down Ukraine. I'll talk about inflation, and just get into those things.
Just a bullet point.
Just a bullet point to remind me to ask him about it so I can check it off and make sure I haven't missed the opportunity because it's so difficult to get those kinds of interviews. But that hasn't happened 5 times in the 37 years I've been doing the show.
You talk to people from all walks of life.
Oh, yeah.
And not just elected officials, business owners, community leaders,
male,
everything
female,
from students,
black, white, fat, skinny, I get them all.
Every walk of life. What in some way it seems like I don't know if anyone can compete with just like the community knowledge that you gain from doing that on a daily basis. How have you used that knowledge and leveraged that in a way to help benefit the community? That's
a good question. And I think the way I've leveraged it is probably something that you and I are both familiar with, and we'll just talk a little bit about this because it's a perfect example. I've been very involved with this wonderful creation called Pathways.
Right.
All right. And because I know all the elected officials, I have been able to introduce this Pathways concept to them, not only verbally, but I have leveraged my relationships to bring them down, get them down there. It would be easy for somebody else to be dismissed, but because I am in the position I am with the media and a microphone, I think those who are less reluctant to get involved will get through that and come on down. So yes, I have leveraged that. And do I do it all the time? No. But things that I think that that I know need help of people who can make a difference, I can bring the two of them together.
And Pathways, for those who don't know,
right?
What problem is Pathways solving?
Pathways is working. It's a creation of a group of people that goes back about 3.5, probably about 4 years ago. Pathways has been around about 3 years. It's an umbrella structure that brings nonprofits together under one roof so that they can work on homelessness side by side for those people who need the help. Rather than kicking them all over the county to get things done, they can send them down a hallway. There's 15 agencies under that one roof at Pathways. We've had a lot of help from a lot of people to get Pathways off the ground, but it needs more help. And for just today, you graciously gave us some of your time to come down and see the Pathways that you hadn't seen in 3 years.
Yeah, it's come a long way.
Come a long way.
I can't believe it's only 3 years because it seems already, if you just walked through that door with a fresh set of eyes and didn't know what it looked like a few years ago, it looks like an institution that's been there for a long time. And that says a lot about the work that is taken to get it there. But
And the community has made that possible through their generosity and through their time, talent, and treasure to make that thing happen. But so because of my relationships with business people and elected officials, community members, I've been able, where somebody on the staff said, I don't know how to get to that person. Oh, I know how to get to him. It's not a problem.
Yeah, don't worry, I know how to get him.
Yeah, that's probably the logo.
The Manning Kimmel Rolodex is probably the most valuable Rolodex in the community.
I know how to get to them.
Yeah.
Because, again, I see all these people all the time, whether it's in a meeting that I'm covering, whether it's straight talk, what have you. I've got those relationships. It's easy for me to call all these people that to others might seem so hard to get to.
Yeah.
But, elected officials are just human beings. They're just like everybody else. But they can't be expected to know everything that's going on.
Well, thank God you use this as a force for good. Because a slightly more nefarious character may not. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Manning, listen, I could do this all day, but I want to be mindful of your time.
It's been almost all day.
Yeah, you've been incredibly generous. And I've always joked with you, like the slowest time in the world is treadmill time, but the fastest time is interview time with Manning. So I know it's been, we've taken up a lot of your time, but I want you to do the honors of helping us sign off, because you're way better at this than I am. Give us the classic straight talk sign off, and I wish Charlie was here to.
Yeah, well, what we normally do is we say, straight talk has been presented by Founders Federal Credit Union, and we talk about our other sponsors, and then we say, here at Substation 2, we make fresh subs and salads 6 days a week, and there's a magical way that we do this that most local people know, but for all the newbies, we're going to say it out loud. At the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, slice, 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 garden, garden, garden.
Now I hope Charlie listens to this.
I'm sure he will.
All right. Well, Manning, thank you so much for coming. It's been a huge honor. I haven't interviewed many people, but this is one that I've been looking forward to for a long time.
Well, you're a good guy, and I want to thank you for all you do for this community.